You see that? Look, what is the essence of a democracy?
Aussieocracy.
All right, hello and welcome. This is the second interview for Aussieocracy. And today we have Matt Monti with us, the leader of the Progressive Party. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Dion.
Oh, great. And for those who don't know, at the moment, as of February, Matt is our current Aussieocracy Prime Minister. The most popular policies have been voted for the previous month, and he is leading the pack. So we'd be very excited to hear some of his views today. So Matt, the Progressive Party, can you tell us a little bit about it in your own words?
So the Progressive Party, as I see it, is a party for people who socially believe and subscribe to sort of the liberal philosophy of equality for all, protecting those more vulnerable, and basically is full of diverse people from all sorts of backgrounds, opinions. So one thing I want to emphasize in the party is, unlike a lot of modern-day political parties, subscribe to the same view on every issue, which is a problem, I think, in our current political discourse, is that every single member of the major parties, at least, has to subscribe to the same sort of view on almost every major issue in politics. So I want to sort of encourage within the party discourse between different members on certain issues. That way we can develop as a party and develop as a people.
Okay, so you say that at the moment, do you think that the major parties are kind of more agreeing? Are they kind of creating this more centrist ideology, and you kind of want to be challenging some of those ideas? Is that fair to say?
They're not agreeing between each other, so Labor and Liberal aren't coming together, but they're sort of forcing their members into a corner when it comes to issues. So, for example, currently with the Barnaby Joyce scandal, all of its members to sort of stick to the opinion that Barnaby should resign and should step down as the Deputy PM, while the Liberal Party are trying to sort of force their members to either support Barnaby or keep quiet. So there's sort of, in big issues today, they're not allowed to sort of have their own opinions or separate from what currently is the big party sort of opinion on a certain topic.
So do you think the reason for that is politicians are more about being protectionist about their own seats, and this is why this kind of very safe reasoning comes in? They're not willing to challenge the status quo or step outside any party lines? Do you think that's a reason, or perhaps there's something else going on with that?
Yeah, I think sort of everyone has their sort of goal to be high up. A lot of people high up in their party, a lot of them are often worried about re-election. So is when people run as part of a major party, they're running with all the ideas of that party. They're not an individual anymore. So being on the ticket, it's really the party's name. So that's the problem, is that everyone has to sort of represent the party.
So you think one of the problems with the process is people can't really have their own opinions. Once you've joined a party, that's it. You need solidarity, because it's really become a dichotomy. It's either us or them. And I guess with minor parties now emerging more than they did before, maybe this gives more of a platform to these new and good ideas. So hopefully that's sort of what the Progressive Party is going to be all about. Is that along the lines of what you're trying to go for?
Essentially, yes. We're trying to encourage more individuals and not just a party, essentially. We want people to be a part of the party and to, work for the betterment of the party and our views. However, we want, different people who have different views on certain topics. So we don't want everyone to have the same view. Otherwise, if we all had the same views, there'd be no improving upon our society or upon our policies as a nation.
Right, so you're going to kind of encourage the conflict, even within your own party. So, I mean, there could be a danger of some people saying, oh, well, maybe we're not quite agreeing on the same thing. How would you manage this sort of conflict within your own party while still trying to stimulate discussion and trying to move things forward?
It's a good question, and I wouldn't obviously encourage. I wouldn't encourage, say, on the issue of same-sex marriage, for within the Progressive Party someone to agree 100% for same-sex marriage, all the, the word marriage and the rights, and someone who completely did not even agree to the existence of people who sexual norms. Sorry. So I don't want huge conflicts, but it's not unhealthy to have differences on policies. So in conflict,
Okay.
but I am encouraging within our party discourse and sort of a less streamlined approach to all policies.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think that's it's pretty healthy, and it's probably a good way of making sure policies develops more organically rather than just, well, the boss says that's how it is and everyone else go along with it or get out, which is maybe akin to some of the major parties going on maybe the last 20 years. So certainly that's a pretty good idea about what your Progressive Party stands for. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the policies. So you've put forward quite a few, but the first one I wanted to talk about was the a fairly hot topic on Aussieocracy right now is euthanasia. And it's just been voted on a referendum, which seems to have gotten quite a bit of support. So can you tell us a little bit about that policy and what it means to the Progressive Party and yourself?
Sure. So one of the biggest issues for me when I joined Aussieocracy was the fight for euthanasia, having been in the news recently. I had a personal experience with one of my relatives having a battle with breast cancer, and she suffered a huge amount in her last few days. So for me, seeing that suffering and knowing we were allowed to, and we didn't have such a conservative, constrictive federal government, she would have had the ability. We all knew she wasn't, unfortunately, going to make it, and she knew she wasn't going to make it through. So for me to see her continually suffer was just really, when I put forward this policy, and this referendum, I really wanted to do her justice and make sure that stuff like this didn't happen again and didn't, continue to happen within Australia.
Well said. I think for many people, they might have a personal connection to somebody like yourself, but even if they didn't, there's quite a lot of popularity for this movement just because of the needlessness of suffering of those terminally ill patients. So you wonder about what the opposition would be, and I guess you know the history probably as well as a few other people and myself. And just to give everyone else a bit of a background, the Northern Territory had this legislation for, I think it was around 18 months, 95 to 97, before it was repealed by the federal government. And the real reason for this was kind of unclear. Only 4 people, as I understand, used this legislation to end their lives voluntarily, and all 4 of these were terminally ill cancer patients. So that's a bit about the history, but now this debate's come up again because really the reasons for the change in 97, people weren't very convinced, I suppose, about the factual reasoning behind it and whether it really had to change. People were worried about things like human life and, maybe this could possibly be a slippery slope to people wanting to end their lives prematurely. So there's a lot of things around it. So Matt, to those people who might oppose this policy for whatever reason, what would you say to these people who would be afraid of a slippery slope or, would be arguing for the fact that all lives must be protected and that's the whole goal of medicine? How would you respond to those sort of arguments?
Well, I think a lot of debates recently have been challenged with slippery slope arguments. For example, same-sex marriage debate also had a huge conservative push with the slippery slope argument, saying that it could lead to polygamy and bestiality. What I'd say to those people who are worried about the slippery slope, and you're worried about the slippery slope, don't allow this issue to turn into that slope. If that all life is sacred, you should understand that that equal sacred lives. What sacred life is peaceful life, is a happy life. So when someone is suffering and is dealing with terminal illness such as cancer, life, it is now suffering and it is enduring. And a lot of the times those people don't make it. Now, if you are a person of religious conviction, then what I'd say to you is, if this person is terminally ill, their lives on their terms and go to this eternal place. I'm personally Christian, so I would question of whether I would want to end my life. It's a question of whether those people who are terminally ill should have the right to make that decision with their families and on their own with the support of their doctors.
Right, so it comes down to this idea of choice and circumstance together. And I think probably some people the slippery slopers would probably say, well, hang on, what is it, just the suffering, or is it the death sentence? Which one is it? Or is it a combination that must lead to this possible decision? There are many people that suffer horrific ailments and pain every day, and yet the legislation would not support them ending their life because it's not terminal. So I think the key would really be making sure there are specific stipulations around what is okay and what's not. Now, the Terminally Ill Act in 95 was specifically for just that. People who were definitely going to die, and under medical advice it could not be prevented or saved, and the person was undergoing extreme pain. In those circumstances, it seems completely reasonable to give people dignity and grace to have that option, and a lot of people would agree. Would there be anything outside of this, though? Would those be the conditions that you would seek as well, or would there be other circumstances that could creep into this as well?
That at the moment in our current situation, I don't see any other sort of situation where euthanasia is honestly the main issue is when someone is terminally ill and whether they should have the right to gracefully and peacefully pass without the suffering associated with their illness. So I wouldn't be pushing personally for broader situations to be included in euthanasia laws. I would personally just be pushing for terminally ill patients who have a very, very low chance of actually surviving their illness. Ability to, with the approval of experts, to peacefully and gracefully end their own life on their own terms.
Great. All right. I think, like I said, it's been a popular referendum so far. I think many people are in agreement. Great. All right. Let's move to a next issue. This is one that's also in the referendum, but it's also part of your policy for the month of February. And this is around Australia Day. There has been some debate whether we should continue to use January 26th as the National Day. What do you and your party have to say about this?
Sorry, just give me a moment. So Australia Day for me, put the policy forward. I did see who is currently a minister for this month. I did see his policy to keep the date on January 26th.
Right.
That has at the moment a 4-3 as I'm looking at the moment ratio. So at the moment his referendum is winning. Majority of the yes vote. I'm hoping that by the time, if my policy is popular enough and I am so lucky to continue as a minister or even a prime minister for a second term, I would a counter-referendum to change the date to any other date. I'm still up for personal debate on that exact date, pushing for a new day in line with my policy. I think I made the point that multiple dates, including May 8 for mate, which would make us probably the butt of a lot of jokes around the world, but have a lot more significance to Australia rather than the 26th of January. The first Australia Day on January 26th, if I remember correctly, it was actually towards the middle of the year. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it was a rally for troops during the Second World War. So I don't think we have such a big connection with the 26th like some opponents of. They believe that there is such a strong 6th of January, but a lot of other dates have more significance. So I think we need to recognise that this date isn't as sacred as some people say, and it has more negative to it than it does positive.
So more negative than positive. That's a big call. So what is the major negative aspect about this date for you?
At the moment, if we look back at the day, and as much as it is that these people did arrive on the 26th and quote unquote discovered Australia too, and told the Western world of the existence of our continent, 26th, as a lot of Aboriginal communities will tell you, is that was a day that sparked the beginning of the destruction of Indigenous culture in Australia. And at the moment we have a crisis communities where less and less Aboriginal elders aren't being able to tell their stories. Aboriginal elders aren't able to continue to teach their culture and to teach their language. More and more Aboriginal children are growing up without knowing that heritage, and it's sort of come from this one point on the 26th when people arrived here in Australia and began to destroy the culture of our Indigenous people. Right, a day that truly unites all Australians, we have to start with the first Australians.
So it's interesting that you make this connection of a destruction of culture, but I couldn't probably say it's not like it's one huge D-Day where this mass destruction occurred. It was the landing of a First Fleet. And the funny thing is, if as we know, this is the date when most of those landing were convicts anyway. I mean, this is just a settlement of Australia. So when you talk about, I'm just not quite following when you say Aboriginal elders can't tell stories like the way they used to. Is this because the 26th there's some sort of obstruction to this, or what? Why is there some great focus about this when it seems like this kind of settlement of the country by British forces and other countries happened over a long time, many years period, up and down. Is it really that destructive? And you're also talking about a fairly low minority of people, of Australians. Most Australians don't go back more than 100 years to their bloodline. So when you talk about the date that sort of stayed there for a long time, and this is what people are used to, it seems when you want to change something, there should be a clear reason or majority for doing so. But I'm just not quite seeing the connection. Can you maybe explain, is it just the Aboriginal community or parts of an Aboriginal community, or is this a growing movement? What is the thinking of when to change it to as well? Because I think if you have this date that's been a part of our culture and history, and then some people are starting to question it, well, but change to what? So with the May 8th suggestion, Was this just because it was mate, or what was the... Is there some date that Australia really can be sold on something more significant, or are you talking more about trying to get rid of some negative consequences from the past? Could you just try to tell me a little bit more about this argument?
Sure. The reason, well, firstly, actually, I do believe it is a growing movement amongst Australians. One big, I think, show that this is a growing movement was the Invasion Day March in Melbourne on the 26th this year. Just as in the past with certain Invasion Day movements, wasn't just Aboriginal and Indigenous communities marching. There were people from all walks of life who were there to stand up for our Indigenous communities and to say, look, this day is hurtful to them and we should be moving this day. Obviously, it's for some reason it's gaining a lot of traction, but it is obviously it's not that huge of a important day. It's simply there for mate. List of other dates here. March 12th is an option. It was the date that the Australian capital was moved to Canberra, which sort of signifies a new Australia. There's also June 30th, which was the first ever Australia Day. So it's that more significant to Australian history, and I think what we need to realise, we really want a day to celebrate Australia and to celebrate everyone in Australia and the amazing country we have become. We need to start by recognising the wrongs of the past that happened on this day, trying to make amends with our Indigenous Australians.
Okay, so it seems like it's more of a symbolic gesture rather than some particular... Yeah,
it's not sort of as much as a huge thing of 26th is appropriate for, technical reasons. It's more of a symbolic gesture to our Indigenous Australians to say we recognise past, especially those that began on this day. We want to make amends. We want to begin to work towards a better Australia in the future.
Okay, good. Well explained. Thank you. All right, so that's a couple of the important policies put forward by Prime Minister Matt Monti for the Progressive Party. So to anyone else listening, if this resonates with you, why don't you get on board and also join the Progressive Party and work with Matt to build some better policies? Or if you are not in agreement, maybe you could find a different home, perhaps with Toby's centrist party, or creating even your own. So that is it for the second interview for Aussieocracy. So one more time, thank you very much, Matt, for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, so join us next time. Thank you very much.